Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1071 for August 25th, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
What the 30 days of bourbon have taught me, or reinforced, if you will, is just how amazing the power of getting together over a drink really is and uniting over a common bond.
September is Bourbon Heritage Month in the U.S., and the folks at Bourbon and Banter celebrate each year with the 30 Days of Bourbon Challenge to try a different bourbon each day for the 30 days of September. I'll talk with Bourbon and Banter founder Pops Garrett about the challenge later on in WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Robin Redbreast? You may have seen me around. Face label, label face. Yeah, that's the one. I'm now contractually obligated to be their spokesbird. Yeah, my agent didn't read the small print.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Gabriel Cardarella from Jewers here. The 2024 U.S. Open Championship may have ended, but you can still get your hands on the whiskey created to honor it. The new Jewers 19-Year-Old Champions Edition. Trust me, a whiskey you don't want to miss. More details coming up.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. We need to start with the business of whiskey this week, as Sweden's Mackmyra Distillery filed for bankruptcy on Monday. The distillery was celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, and the filing came just 4 days after Mackmyra had closed a deal to return to the UK market once again. Chairman Peter Ski said in a statement on the Mackmyra website that the company had been struggling with profitability and cash flow for some time. The company's assets, including all of its maturing whiskey, are now in the hands of a bankruptcy trustee. Meanwhile, Wales's Penderyn Distillery is shutting down its newest of 3 distilleries because they're producing too much whiskey. The Swansea Distillery opened just last year, and the shutdown is said to be temporary. Tours and tastings continue at the distillery. In other news, Brown-Forman is ending its diversity, inclusion, and equity programs. The company was the latest to come under pressure from conservative activists who have been targeting publicly traded companies for their DEI programs. There's no word on what this means for the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative. That's the program Brown-Forman has been partnering with Uncle Nearest Tennessee Whiskey on for the last several years. Brown-Forman will also end its participation in the Human Rights Campaign's LGBTQ Equity Index, which rates companies on their treatment of LGBTQ employees. John Campbell is leaving his role as production director at Lockley Distillery. In a post on social media, he said, quote, "I still have dreams to fulfill, projects to make happen, and places to see, and I want to drive those ambitions on." No word yet from John on what his future plans are, but we wish him the best of luck. Beyoncé is the latest celebrity to get into the whiskey business. She has partnered with Moet Hennessy and Dr. Bill Lumsden to create the Sir Davis American Whiskey brand. It's named for her great-grandfather, who was a moonshiner in Texas back in the day. The whiskey is a blend of 51% rye and 49% malted barley from undisclosed distilleries and will sell for $89 a bottle. I received a sample this week, and I'll have my tasting notes for it in a few minutes. Other new whiskeys of note this week, Suntory Global Spirits is bringing back the 13-year-old Baker's Single Barrel Bourbon. It was created by Booker Noe as a tribute to his cousin Baker Beam, who worked at the Jim Beam Distillery for 38 years. It'll be available while supplies last for around $150 a bottle. Bardstown Bourbon Company has released a new addition to its Origin Series lineup. The new high wheat bourbon is a 6-year-old whiskey made with 39% wheat in the mash bill. It'll sell for around $50 a bottle. Old Elk is out with a new straight wheat whiskey finished in French Limousin oak casks. It's matured for 6 years in new charred oak casks before being transferred to the French oak casks for final maturation. It'll be available for $89.99 a bottle. Old Elk plans to offer a Ribby Port cask-finished rye whiskey later this year. Kentucky's J. Mattingly bourbon traces its history back to John Graves Mattingly, who may have had the first registered distillery in the Commonwealth back in 1845. Now they're celebrating Mattingly's 201st birthday with the release of their new flagship whiskey, J. Mattingly 1845 Small Batch Classic Bourbon. It's a double-staved release in which the whiskey is exposed to a second set of charred oak staves while maturing. The 6.5-year-old bourbon is available at the distillery in Frankfort, Kentucky, along with select retailers and online to 46 states for $110 a bottle. The Dalmore is out with a new 30-year-old single malt finished in port wine casks. Only 936 bottles were released with a price tag of $6,000 each. Talisker is also out with its latest release of a 30-year-old single malt. Just 2,160 bottles will be available through ReserveBar.com and Malts.com, along with select retailers. There's no word on pricing. Lindores Abbey Distillery has released Thyron, a new single malt that celebrates the Abbey's links to its sister distillery at Tyrone-Gardet, which is the mother abbey for Tyronensian monks, that includes Friar John Core. The whiskey was matured in red wine barriques, bourbon casks, and virgin French oak casks, made from trees grown in the Tyrone-Gardet area, which were replaced with new plantings 2 years ago. It'll be the first in a series of annual limited releases from the distillery. There's no word on pricing. Tom & Toole is out with 3 new cask-finished single malts, the Amarone wine cask finish, the Madeira wine cask finish, and the Tempranillo wine cask finish. All 3 are available at UK retailers for £43 each. Douglas Lang & Company has released the latest Epicurean limited edition. The Lowland blended malt is finished in Calvados casks and is bottled at 48% ABV. Just 1,800 bottles are available worldwide. There's no word on pricing. Whistle Pig and Brothers Bond Bourbon are collaborating on a new project aimed at raising funds for Regenerate America, which promotes regenerative farming practices. The Regenerate America bundle includes Whistle Pig's Farm Stock Beyond Bonded Rye Whiskey, along with a bottle of Brothers Bond Regenerative Grain Straight Bourbon Whiskey. That one is a 4-grain straight bourbon made from regeneratively grown grain, grown from within 20 miles of the MGP distillery in Indiana. The 2-bottle bundle sells for $189, with part of the proceeds going to Regenerate America. And finally, Brazil is the latest country to grant Scotch whisky geographical protection status. The move is expected to give the Scotch whisky industry power to get knockoff whiskies off the market and could be worth as much as £25 million to the industry over the next 5 years. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. Tickets are still available for Whiskey and Barrel Night at the Games this coming weekend in Pleasanton, California. The Whiskey X Nashville is September 5th, along with the Michter's Speakeasy at the Fraser History Museum in Louisville, Kentucky. Spirit of Speyside Distilled is on September 6th and 7th in Elgin, Scotland, along with Maltstock that weekend in the Netherlands, Whiskies of the World in Denver, Colorado, and I'll be at the Whiskey Show in London that weekend. The sold-out Kentucky Bourbon Festival is September 13th through the 15th in Bardstown. The Whiskey Show in Brisbane, Australia is on the 14th. And Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville hosts a Horse Soldier Bourbon Dinner on September 18th. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Every year, Dewar's, the official Scotch whiskey of the U.S. Open Championship, rolls out a special limited edition whiskey to celebrate that year's tournament. The 2024 championship wrapped up in June, but the 2024 Dewar's 19-year Pinehurst edition is available now, and you don't want to miss it. This year's 19-year whiskey is double-aged, then extra-matured in rye casks, offering a rich profile with notes of pear and heather honey. There's a hint of spice in there, too, along with a dusting of cinnamon and cocoa powder. It's a sensory delight for any true whiskey or golf fan. So trust me, my fellow aficionados, grab a bottle and enjoy a whiskey crafted with the same skill and precision that makes the U.S. Open legendary. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2024. Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 46% alcohol by volume. Imported by John Dewar & Sons, Coral Gables, Florida.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Oban and the Classic Malts lineup. September is Bourbon Heritage Month, and there is no shortage of new bourbons to taste these days. The folks at Bourbon and Banter are challenging bourbon lovers to take the 30 Days of Bourbon Challenge and try a new bourbon every day during September. Pops Garrett is the founder of Bourbon and Banter and joined me on a Zoom call the other day. One of the things I like to do when we bring somebody on for the first time is get some of your background. How did you get started with Bourbon and Banter?
Yeah, so I fell into the world of bourbon when I was working in the media advertising world. I worked for a company called Group M. It's one of the largest media buying, and we would go out and entertain clients quite a bit. We were buying media through Facebook and Google, and so these dinners would be these epic 4-hour events, right, with lots of food and drink and stories. And as I entered my early 30s, I started feeling left over in the morning because I was drinking 7 and 7s. That was what I grew up drinking in St. Louis, and so I had to find something that didn't have sugar. Sugar was the enemy. So after a short but abrupt research, I fell into bourbon. It wasn't love at first sip, but I got into it. My wife bought me a couple bottles, and then I went down the rabbit hole, as so many people do. And before you know it, I started a bourbon club at work, which became legendary, and moved around for several jobs after that. And for that bourbon club at work, I launched a Facebook group called Bourbon and Banter. And one weekend, the folks at the Bourbon Review spotted it, shared it, and it went from 30 people at work following it to about 400 in a matter of 2 days. And I was like, hey, looks like other people are interested in this topic as well. So let's throw my hat in the ring and see if I can meet some cool people. That's how it started. And, that was circa 2009, 2010.
And it's just gone downhill from there, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I lost the rest of my hair. I grew a beard. Seems to be a requirement, at least on the bourbon side. But no, it's been fun. I mean, I spent the majority of the remainder of my career, Bourbon and Banter was a side project for me, if you will. I worked continually in media, advertising, PR, up until a couple of years ago, and I ran Bourbon and Banter as my sanity project. I recruited 15 other people over the years, actually more than that, but 15 remained pretty active, to write and contribute content, become great friends. I've built lifelong friendships as a result of this, and just kind of doing it our own way, right? We weren't relying on sponsorships or ad dollars to survive because it was a side project, which allowed us to write about the things we were interested in, to not write for a period of time if we were burned out, and most importantly, be able to be really honest about what we thought. And it's just been a fantastic ride. And then we hit COVID.
And what happened after COVID?
So COVID, I had taken my first non-agency job ever in the marketing world, and was working for a fantastic company. Started in December, and found myself 3 months later working from home remotely. And so I started getting people asking me to host some tastings, things of that nature virtually. So I came up with a way to be able to fulfill that for them that worked. And then about 8-9 months later, I found myself with an opportunity to take some runway and dive into doing that. So I launched a second business, because one isn't enough, called Drink Curious. And Drink Curious is a dedicated spirits company. And I travel all over the country now, hosting bourbon and other types of spirits tastings for people, mostly corporate clients, right? For there, I've kind of built a niche as the chief drinking officer, helping people understand how you can incorporate spirits to create a really engaging and memorable experience that people will want to attend, which will help them drive their bottom line. And at the same time, continuing with Bourbon and Banter and continuing to grow that and bring in some people to kind of focus on things more full time for me, from the editor role to a new community manager that we brought in, or basically promoted from within, giving me more time to focus on Drink Curious while a lot of the Bourbon and Banter stuff get the attention that it needs.
Let's talk about the 30 Days of Bourbon Challenge. You've done this
Absolutely.
for 11 years now.
Yeah, so we started this way back on our first anniversary. It started as originally the first year was the 30 days of bourbon swag giveaway, right? And was just a way to celebrate and share with people. We gave away a bunch of stuff, but then it was so successful. Later that year, we decided this should be something we do for Bourbon Heritage Month. So we started that, and then shortly after that, the idea was presented from the team of like we should do 30 days of drinking, right? So I took the idea, built out a calendar, built out sort of the rules and concept around it, and started promoting it. And it caught on. And suddenly we started seeing people who were there drinking with us, right? They'd take our calendar, they'd write what they were drinking, they'd post it on social media and share it. Then other people would challenge their friends to get involved. And before you know it, became this big thing that everyone was getting involved in, getting attention from folks. And we have had fantastic luck reaching out to all of the distillery partners and vendors and saying, hey, do you want to get involved and help us celebrate Bourbon Heritage Month? So they do. They sponsor us. They provide swag. We do giveaways of our various types. But the real crux of it is that 30 days to basically get people to stretch and try a different bourbon every day of the month. No repeats, no rye, no scotch, no Irish whiskey, just bourbon.
No Irish, no rye, no scotch, just bourbon? Come on.
Just bourbon for 30 days. No, there's plenty of months left in the year, right? The one exception we do is you can work Tennessee whiskey in, right? Because it technically meets all the requirements of bourbon. So we're not going to be that picky. But yeah, no, the idea is to stretch yourself, right? And you know what's really funny about this, Mark, is when we started this, most people are like, I don't have 30 bourbons. I can't do this, right? I don't want to go out to a bar and spend all this money. And if you look at the last couple of years, that's hardly a mention anymore. People have got such large amounts of bourbon at home. Just the average bourbon drinker now has 30 bottles, which is fascinating to me. And yeah, so it's a way to do it. We have people who throw parties to get together. So there's bottle shares so they can try new things or take samples away and try them throughout there. We have people who do nothing but cocktails for 30 days, but each one with a different bourbon. There's a lot of ways to make it happen.
What have you learned from all this?
Well, when we launched Bourbon and Banter, it was built around this concept of having a drink with a friend or someone new and getting to know them. And that's where the word banter came in. And that was always the crux of what we did. When I launched Bourbon and Banter years ago, my wife was like, what's your goal? And at the time, it was like, oh, it'd be cool if I got a couple bottles sent to me to sample, right? And that happened very quickly. And she's like, what's next? And I said, I just want to meet people. I want to hear cool stories. I want to meet people. I'm a very social guy. So what the 30 days of bourbon have taught me, or reinforced, if you will, is just how amazing the power of getting together over a drink really is and uniting over a common bond. So whether it's in person, which is always preferred, right? But even as COVID has taught us, still getting together someone virtually and having a drink and slowing down and having a conversation, it's so good for our mental health, for our social health. It's good for business, right? As my drink curious clients have seen. So it's just reinforced for me and taught me that the power of a drink and people getting together can overcome so many things. And in a country right now that's facing such a challenge, I would like to tell people that America really needs a drink right now. And quite frankly, bourbon is that drink. And that's what we want to do for the next 30 days is have everybody have fun, hang out, take some of the stress off, and explore, the great world of bourbon whiskey.
So what's your go-to bourbon?
That is a question I get asked a lot. And I try to, I have to be honest with you, my first answer is it's like my children. It's depending on what one did to me which day, which is my favorite. But I'll be honest, the best way to answer it is when I travel, because at home I'm surrounded by whiskey. So when I travel, it's a little bit different. First thing I'll do is when I go to bars, I'll see if they have any single barrels, right? I want to see what their palate is like, what they've picked. If they don't have that, I don't like to spend a lot of money when I'm out there. So if I want something kind of mid-range, I'm going to go with Four Roses single barrel. It's always there. It's good. If I want to drink a little bit more rustic, a little bit oakier, I'll go with Russell's Reserve 10. And then if I'm looking to drink for a couple hours and not spend much money, I'll go with Wild Turkey 101. I absolutely love that and find that for $19, $20 a bottle, there's no bigger utility player out there.
All solid choices in my book. I get asked that same question a lot too, and I had to ask it.
No, absolutely.
What makes bourbon so much fun?
I think it's the folklore of it all. I mean, when we think about getting together with people and I can't, I speak for my generation. I'm 52 years old, and I very much have a interest and thing for tradition and history and anything that aligns with that. So for me, when I sit down with bourbon with people, it's almost a little ritualistic, right? You've got the glasses, you set them down, you open the bottle, you pass it around, you pour it, you drink it. There's an element of adulthood that goes with it, but there's that tradition, that ritual that forces you to stop. Much like, I'm a cigar smoker. People tell you about a cigar, right? Why do you like a cigar? Because I slow down, I stop, and I have this ritual. So for me, that's part of it. That's what kind of the process of drinking bourbon does. But bourbon itself, the stories, what it represents, whether factually or mythically, I think is very important to people. And I think it transcends into other styles of whiskey just as much. But as an American, right, it's ours. And it's something that we can huddle around and talk about, invest in. And then you add in the layer that now with so many distilleries making their versions of bourbons and doing things their ways, it gives us an exceptional opportunity like no other to go out and experience this from a bourbon tourism perspective. That ultimately all of that leads to stories. And we are people that thrive on stories, and COVID got rid of a lot of stories. We used up all of our stories, right? We were locked up at home. So for me, it's the tradition, the process, and then ultimately drinking with other people and the stories that come out of it. And that, I think, is what bourbon helps fuel incredibly well, and has enriched my life, in ways that I could have never imagined as a result.
How so?
I never was a drinker growing up. Mark, I, grew up in a household where, I would have a party at my house with 70 people and my parents would be there. No one would try to sneak alcohol in. I really didn't drink until I went to Japan. When I was 18 years old, I went over as an exchange student, and suddenly I was thrust into the legendary Japanese drinking culture, and I survived it and I enjoyed it and kind of became a drinker. But it was beer, it was wine. It wasn't, whiskey. Gosh, if I could go back to my 18, 20-year-old self in Japan with whiskey, wouldn't that be cool? Yeah. Back in the day, right? But for me, I didn't get into whiskey until my 30s, right? And that was something I never imagined. And then to be able to say that I would have people unified around this. I mean, my mother, before I really got into this, my mother passed away, unfortunately, but her dad drank whiskey and was not a great man because of it, right? So for her, in her world, whiskey was bad. But in my world, suddenly whiskey was creating friendships, was opening up doors, opening up opportunities, running the blog and building that as a publisher helped me in so many ways with my career as well. Like I went and worked at a PR agency and was on both sides of the coin. So it's helped enrich that. It's been able to open doors and have stories with folks. And now, you've been doing this a long time, full time, right? Now, with Drink Curious as a tasting business, this is what I do for a living, right? I'm not working for an agency. I'm not doing more. It's all this. And so for me, that's enriched. It's created opportunities and exposure that, 20 years ago, if you said, hey, by the way, whiskey's the key to your future, I would have been like, you're drunk, right? Like so many people would have said. In fact, I'll tell you this. When I first got into bourbon, Mark, I remember talking to a friend of mine and I said, I like to drink bourbon. And literally he started whispering. He went, you drink bourbon? I drink bourbon too. And I was like, why are we whispering? But back in the day, right? If you drank a lot of bourbon, people are like, are you a drunk? I mean, that was kind of the attitude for a lot of people. And look at it now. It's everywhere, right? It's in Martha Stewart's magazines. It's on your hearty cheeseburgers, so to speak. And everybody's into it. And what a ride, man. What a ride.
I think that does it. Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
No, I mean, all I can say is, we would love as many people to join us as possible for the 30 days of bourbon. They can download their tracker now and start prepping their strategy for conquering the month. And then on September 1st, we will open up the 30 Days of Bourbon giveaway where people can enter and earn entries for some great swag prizes. We'll be giving stuff out every weekend and throughout the month, surprise giveaways. And so just go to 30daysofbourbon.com, find out everything you need to know, and join us online for what's going to be the best damn month of the year.
Thanks to Pops Garrett for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We've added a link to the 30 Days of Bourbon website in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Oban, a deliciously smooth single malt known for its coastal charm and Highland heritage, loved by whiskey lovers worldwide. Discover Oban's full lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with this year's Old Forester Birthday Bourbon. It's a 12-year-old bourbon bottled at 53.5% ABV, and the nose is fruity with touches of red apples, apricots, subtle spices, pipe tobacco, and a soft oakiness. The taste is fruity at first, followed by a burst of cinnamon spice that takes over and fades slowly to reveal oak tannins, cocoa beans, and honey. The finish has a caramel candy sweetness with lingering spice and a touch of tobacco. I'm scoring the 2024 Old Forester Birthday Bourbon a 93. Next up, the Sir Davis American Whiskey from Beyonce and Moet Hennessy's Dr. Bill Lumsden. It's bottled at 44% ABV and, as I mentioned during the news, is a blend of 51% rye and 49% malted barley finished in PX sherry casks. The nose has touches of cinnamon, clove, and ginger spices with a touch of orange peel, raisins, and brown sugar. The taste starts off with a toffee sweetness at first, followed by an explosion of baking spices that fade to reveal orange peel, brown sugar, and shortbread cookies. The finish has a honey sweetness balanced by lingering spice and a touch of cherry pie. It's delightfully complex, and I'm scoring the Sir Davis American Whiskey a 94. Now let's look at a unique bourbon from Iowa's Cedar Ridge Distillery, known best for its quintessential single malts. This bourbon is finished in Amontillado sherry casks and is bottled at cask strength, 57.5% ABV. The nose has touches of caramel and figs on top of dried fruits, oak, and sandalwood. The taste is thick, astringent, and chewy, with a heavy sherry influence at first, followed by notes of baking spices, caramel, and dates. The finish is long with figs and dates on top of lingering cinnamon spice, soft oak, and honey. I'm scoring the Cedar Ridge Amontillado sherry-finished bourbon a 92. And finally, let's look at the latest Ardbeg release from the Anthology series. The Unicorn's Tail is matured in a combination of Madeira and ex-bourbon casks and is bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has touches of peat smoke, tar, creosote, dried flowers, and honey. The taste starts off fruity and floral, with a slow onset of peat smoke and allspice, along with a hint of lemon zest. The finish has lingering peat smoke and creosote, along with heather, honey, and dried fruits. I'm scoring Ardbeg's The Unicorn's Tail a 92. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,700 whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey. With the news this week about Mackmyra and Pendrin, I decided to conduct some informal polls to see how worried you are about the future of the whiskey industry. On LinkedIn, 46% of those who answered the poll said they were somewhat worried about the future of the industry, while 15% said they were very worried, and 39% said they were not at all worried. On Twitter, 46% said they weren't worried, while 44% said they were somewhat worried, and 10% said they were very worried. And in the WhiskyCast community app, 77% said they were somewhat worried, 23% said not at all worried. Among the comments, Jordy Mosky posted this on X: "Definitely worried, but can't say I'm surprised. The excess is the same that took hockey cards and comic books to the same heights in the 90s and aughts and will likely bring the same spiral. Producers need to learn a little from a lot is more sustainable than a lot from a little." And Tabitha at Sake Baku on X added this: I think this was inevitable. The industry had expanded so quickly, and that growth was unsustainable. I sometimes think that oftentimes people forget that whiskey is a business. Brian Redden added this: have we reached a point of saturation/contraction like craft beer did a couple of years ago? The Tracer Bullet posted this in the WhiskyCast community app: I have been thinking that the expansion has been too fast and we would start seeing the effects. As in one of my other posts, I am starting to see once sought-after bottles just sitting on the shelf, sometimes for over a year. Granted, there are still some that get snapped up, but I think we are starting to see a slowdown of the whiskey boom. And Christopher Glenn added this comment: I'll be the doom and gloom guy. More closings are on the way. Expansion was likely too fast at Penderyn, and far too many new ventures have popped up in the past 5 to 10 years. With just a mild downturn in consumption, these smaller and newer distilleries will have a tough road ahead. If you'd like to add your comments, download the free WhiskyCast community app and join the conversation. You'll find it in your app store. You can also find us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey, on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com.
100 individual farms of Irish barley, separately harvested, malted, fermented, distilled and matured. Is that too much effort? Perhaps. Unless you're interested in flavour above all else. Waterford Whiskey, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. 2 more states have joined the short list of U.S. states that allow direct shipping of whiskeys and other distilled spirits directly from distillers to consumers. New York this week made direct-to-consumer shipping for small distilleries permanent. It had just been temporary as part of COVID relief efforts, and out-of-state distillers will now be able to get a license to ship to consumers in New York. Alaska also created a new license for in-state and out-of-state craft distillers to be able to ship up to 4.5 liters of product to consumers in the state. Right now, 10 states allow some form of direct-to-consumer shipping for distilled spirits. That's compared to 47 for wine. We'll have more on this story next time around. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links to the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course you'll find a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from your app store. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
The 2024 release of Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition is out now. Available at Dewars.com. Get it while you can and appreciate every double-aged rye cask finished dram. Please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.